time for Joan Esposito. Live, local, and progressive.
Thank you for the good programming. I appreciate the content and really enjoy every moment.
It's a privilege to have you on your station and listen. It's good stuff. It's very educational.
It's time for Joan Esposito on WCPT 820, Chicago's Progressive Talk.
Before we get to the meat of the show, a little bit of, not exactly a correction, but let's add to what you just heard in the news at the top of the hour. They made it sound like, yes, we do have a trade deal with Canada. And I was listening to that reporting, and if that's all you heard, I think I would have come away with the idea that, no more tariffs for Canada. But in an interview I saw where a reporter was shouting a question at Donald Trump, and he was like, "Oh, it's great, Canada, yeah, we're back." And she said, "Well, what about Canadian cars?" Because, a lot of the cars that you'd think would be, quote unquote, American are actually made or at least assembled in Canada. By the way, you can find out where your car came from if you know what to look for when you read the VIN. I'm not going to go into it now, but you can Google it if you want to. It's a good way to figure out where your car was put together. And if your car was put together in multiple countries, you can find that information too. So a reporter said, "Well, what about Canadian cars?" And then you saw him waffle. Yeah. And then, like I said, he was kind of whiffling and waffling. But the gist of what I heard from him is, there's still going to be tariffs on those, but there'll be a lot less. So this idea that somehow there are no tariffs with us in Canada, that's really not 100% true. At least according to, unless Donald Trump didn't understand the question, who knows? Anything is possible. Okay. So a little bit of clarification there, if you don't mind, as we get ready to start our day. So many things I want to talk about. Aaron Kleinman is going to be here, and there were primaries yesterday, and there were some surprising results in those primaries, and we're going to talk about that in greater detail with Aaron. So I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time on that, except Darlene Graham. That's not her legal last name, but she's pretty much dropped her married name now since she wants everybody to remember that she's Lindsey Graham's sister. And in addition to filling out the remainder of his term, she wants to run for his seat. And while it seems ridiculous, there is a tradition, like a congressman dies, his wife fills out the rest of his term, and sometimes gets elected. So that is what Darlene Graham is trying to do. But I would say her chances took a real hit. She was being asked some questions, and she got booed. It's hard to hear the booing from the crowd, but trust me, she got booed. She was asked about, like Taiwan and, all these other countries, and how would she, because her brother was quite the hawk. And would she still consider these other countries to be vital to American security? Does this woman not have anybody advising her? Is she so arrogant that she didn't prepare for this, that she didn't work with anybody? Like, if you're working with a candidate, you train them, because everybody can get hit with a question they're not expecting. And if you're working with a candidate, you practice that kind of thing. Maybe you don't know the specifics of the question that is going to stump your candidate, but you can pretty much count on the fact that there will be one. And you practice and answer, to those kinds of questions. Darlene Graham was asked about national security and did countries like, Taiwan enter into that? Holy moly. Listen to what Darlene Graham said.
Senator, are Taiwan and the South China Sea national security issues for the United States? If so, why?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Are Taiwan and the South China Sea national security issues for the United States, and if so, why or how?
I'm just going to be honest here. I'm not on national security. I'm not that informed on national security, but I do support the military. My brother was in the Air Force for 33 years, so I will do everything I can to support the military. My dad was in the Army. I'm not a polished politician up here. National security is not my thing, not my area of expertise, but I do support the military.
Okay, this woman isn't running to be mayor of a town or even in the state legislature. She's running to be a senator. Senators are supposed to know about this kind of stuff, have given it some thought. At the very least, she could have looked to the person asking the question, and she could have been smart enough to say, well, every country in the world matters to U.S. national security, and gone on with some blah, blah, blah answer. But to stand there and say, well, I really don't know about that. I mean, I know that her whole claim to fame is that she's just like you. She's just like you, and that's why she will be such a good representative for you in the Senate, because she's just like you. But I don't think people want to think of themselves as wholly uninformed about things that will be important when you are a senator. National security, it just isn't my thing. Well, then maybe, sweetheart, you should not be running for the Senate. Man, oh man. And what bothers me is that maybe she thought that she was going to win over people with her candor. Oh, I really haven't spent any time, just like you, Marge in the front row. What do you know about national security? Probably not much. And you know what, Marge? I'm just like you. But I think, honestly, I think we want, call me crazy, I think we want more from our senators. I would like to think that my senators know more than I do about stuff, because you know what's important for your job. Maybe you work for a company in their supply chain, and by God, you know supply chain. You know how it moves and where are the best places to source your parts, because that's your job. If you were talking to somebody and they said, well, supply chain issues are really, really interesting. Where do you think is the best place right now to source this part? Well, sourcing parts really isn't my thing. And if it isn't your thing, then what are you doing working in supply chain? This is just one example. And I think this debate, this answer is very, very important, because I think there are a lot of people who like the idea of sending someone's daughter or someone's wife or someone's sister. I liked that person. Therefore, their wife is going to be just like them. So it's sort of a continuation of what was there before. Not necessarily, folks. And Darlene Graham has not only shown us that national security isn't her thing, she's running for Senate. Do you think somebody could have briefed her on what a senator does and the issues facing the Senate, at least internationally, nationally? The fact that she didn't take the time to get educated about the job before she went to do this debate, honestly, I think is insulting to her potential voters. I think I don't have to learn anything. I don't have to think about anything. I'm just here because he was my brother and you liked him, therefore you like me. But don't ask me to spend any time actually learning about the job. Come on. That's not why I'm here. I'm not here because I know things. I'm here because my brother was here. And because every time Donald Trump met me, he just liked me. Okie dokie. I think that a lot of people who might have otherwise said, I really like Lindsey, and so I really want to give his sister a chance, are going to look at that debate and say, if you really wanted this job, why haven't you been spending time learning about it? Why haven't you been spending time thinking about your stance on the issues of the day? She could have even just said, I'm a lot like my brother, and pretty much every stance he had on defense and national security, those are my stances as well. There's a million ways that she could have finessed this rather than saying, I don't know anything about that. I think she insulted the people of her state. And now I'm going to let this go. I'm going to let this go. We're going to touch base very quickly about Iran because we are telling the world that our Navy is helping oil shipments get through the Strait of Hormuz. Is that true? I don't know. Does that mean that Iran has stopped firing on those ships? Probably not. The New York Times said that the United States was stealthily shepherding tankers. Okay, stealthily. Do they all have cloaking technology? Stealthily. Are they going like in the middle of the night when they think everybody's asleep? Interesting. And apparently Trump recently released a map that showed the Strait of Hormuz as American territory. That's definitely a map that is going to promote the peace process. And, maybe it was a joke, but, chances are with Donald Trump it wasn't, because most of what comes out of his mouth should be a joke and isn't. Who better to comment on us apparently claiming that the Strait of Hormuz is or could be in the future our territory than Donald Trump's probably number one enemy, Rosie O'Donnell. Jimmy Kimmel's on vacation, so who did he ask to fill in for a week? The woman that Donald Trump seems to hate more than any other woman on the planet, to the point where a couple of years ago, she picked up and moved to Ireland. And she flew back, though. And she had some thoughts on Donald Trump. She had some thoughts about the Strait of Hormuz. She had lots of thoughts. Let's listen to Rosie O'Donnell now.
I'm so grateful to be filling in for Jimmy and to be hosting a talk show on network TV once again. This has been kind of a strange experience for me because all of a sudden I'm re-famous. I'm back in the spotlight, all thanks to President Oompa J. Loompa, who is watching us this evening from inside a catering cart. You know, I couldn't have done it without you, sweetie. You brought me back, just like you did with fascism and the measles. All right. We also learned today that the United States could be acquiring some new land soon. Velveto Corleone was up bright and early at 7 a.m. this morning to post an image of a map listing the Strait of Hormuz as a U.S. territory, which makes literally no sense. I'll put it this way. If the U.S. is in charge of the strait, then I'm also straight. And let's face it, I'm not. The Moranathon continues.
Yeah. You may recall that Donald Trump has been feuding with Rosie O'Donnell. I don't know how long it's been now, but you know, I shared that with you. I also listened to another one of her opening monologues, and she doesn't, you know, it's not all Trump all the time. But she does mention, she looks at the camera and she goes, I know you're watching. Yeah. So there is that. That's your little Iran update for the day. Before I go too much further afield, I do want to remind you that it is Wednesday. Isn't it Wednesday? Yes, it is Wednesday. I have to orient myself. That Monday through Thursday, we spend the first hour of the show talking about the news of the day, reading your texts, and taking your calls. Devin is in the studio today, 773-763-9278, 773-763-9278. You can use that number to shoot me a text. You can use that number to talk to Devin and tell him what you want to talk about with me on the radio. 773-763-WCPT. If you are interested in becoming a first-time caller, I've had more and more of those lately, and I couldn't be happier about that. Okay, let us return to the news of the day, shall we? Oh, yes, an update on the USS Abraham Lincoln. Remember the aircraft carrier where sailors were beginning to self-harm, 3 of them that we know of, because they were supposed to go home in May and their deployment has been extended. It was extended with no end date. And they were having problems getting enough fresh food. They were not, care packages sent by their families were taking 4 to 5 months to get to them. There were sanitation problems, which, oh God, I really don't want to get into right now. Seth Moulton, who is quite potentially shooting for a Senate seat, he was talking about the USS Abraham Lincoln. This was a press gaggle, so, you know, the sound isn't always the best. But he is from Massachusetts. He is a politician, very well thought of there. And let's hear what Representative Seth Moulton had to say about the USS Abraham Lincoln.
This disaster on the Abraham Lincoln lays bare the fact that the administration had no strategy getting into this war, has no clue how to get out of it, and the war is completely backfired, so now the ship cannot even go into ports that used to be safe ports in the region for resupply. On top of that, they're clearly admitting it's a problem because they're now bailing it out by pulling a carrier out of the Pacific, where we have to be deterring and preventing a war with China.
Okay, there's your USS Abraham Lincoln update. And remember, even though the Military Times broke the story about the poor conditions and the 3 sailors confirmed to have attempted self-harm, Donald Trump said that they should stay on duty longer because, you know, he's such an expert. having dodged military service numerous times, we never have really seen those x-rays of those bone spurs, have we? Yeah, he has no idea what it takes to be a sailor on an aircraft carrier. But he knows that they should, suck it up and keep serving. That's what you signed up for, right? And Pete Hegseth is saying that this reporting, as I may have mentioned, the reporting was, it was picked up by a lot of places, but, pick up the Military Times. Go to militarytimes.com. And families, some of them by name, but most of them anonymously because they don't want their sailors to be the subject of some kind of retribution. The families are telling what the conditions are like. The George Washington aircraft carrier is on the way to replace the Abraham Lincoln, thank God. But one of the destroyers that used to be part of the Washington group itself found itself, the Benford, was without power. They had some sort of an electrical problem. They were without power in the South China Sea for 4 days, which meant no making fresh water, no ability to cook, no ability to flush toilets, and, oh, by the way, no ability to control the ship. They were adrift for 4 days before they were towed in. So, yeah, Pete Hegseth, man, oh, man, don't you think he's doing a great job? He absolutely is doing a great job. A couple of little things I didn't mention yesterday that, it was reported that NASCAR was coming back to Chicago. Well, no, that was apparently premature. It's not. Apparently, the reporting is that NASCAR and the city of Chicago could not agree on a date to run their race through the city. So there will be no NASCAR in 2027. For those of you who enjoyed that, I'm very sorry. It's not going to happen. You're going to have to go to a speedway to see those NASCAR cars. And another weird thing, we've reported that Iran is believed to be behind cyber attacks, trying to cripple water treatment facilities in so far at least 7 states. And the fear is that there would be cyber attacks beyond that. Nobody is saying that this is Iran. I don't believe this is Iran, and more likely, frankly, to come from our government. But Blue Sky, the social media platform Blue Sky, had an outage recently because cyber attackers were trying to shut it down. Isn't that interesting? If you want to read the whole story, it's in TechCrunch. Blue Sky now has announced that they've upgraded their defenses in response to this. Well, one would hope they had upgraded their defenses. Real quick, we don't have a lot of time left, but I've got to share this with you. Our Senator Tammy Duckworth was at the Illinois State Fair, and listen to this.
We are a safe state for immigrants. And Kwame, where are you, Kwame? If you're out there, I love your new slogan, don't toy with Illinois. If you want to put that on a T-shirt and say, don't f***ing toy with Illinois, I will buy a dozen of them. Put it on a T-shirt, Kwame. Sell those T-shirts.
Yeah, don't effing toy with Illinois. If those T-shirts go up for sale, I will be sure to let you know. But so far, they're the little tamer version of the T-shirt exists. We're going to take a break. We're going to be back with more calls and texts after this.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
We haven't been talking about the Supreme Court today, but it is the subject of one texter's concern. Hi, Joan. What is the point of even having a Supreme Court in this country? They declare Trump's self-declared tariffs illegal and unconstitutional, and he declares more anyway. Ridiculous. Well, that is the $600,000 question. What if people just ignore what the court tells them to do? How does that play out? I mean, lower courts are supposed to be able to utilize the U.S. Marshal Service to enforce their rulings. But if it's something that goes against the government, remember the Department of Justice is in charge of the U.S. Marshal Service. So they're certainly not going to let marshals go after anybody on their team. That's not how their game is played. So that's a really, really, really important question. Let's go to the phone lines. Let's go to Michigan, where Ron is on the line. Hey, Ron, thanks for the call.
You're welcome, Joan. Joan, if I'm not mistaken, the Abraham Lincoln was the aircraft carrier that had the fire in its laundry room several months back.
I don't remember.
Check that out on the New York Times, please. I may be mistaken, but if that's the case, then the Abraham Lincoln has been because the story was sailors have to double bunk and go on hot cots. In other words, when you're done with your job, you got to go right to a cot because the fire caused a lot of destruction of their sleeping quarters, and I would imagine
I just looked it up. It was the USS Gerald Ford.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that was a bad fire too.
Yes, and well, this was in Monday's New York Times. The warehouse where we keep the stores for our ships that are stationed in the Middle East. The drone attack by the Iranians hit that warehouse, which destroyed a lot of the foodstuffs and other material that was supposed to have been, I believe, shipped to the Abraham Lincoln, which is causing
the storage facility where all of the food comes from, where all of the care packages come from. You're absolutely right. It was attacked, and that's why they're saying there was a problem getting deliveries.
Yes, and something else we must remember, as much as of the hardship that those sailors are under, their families are even worse under stress. If you can imagine families with children who mainly have to depend on food stamps because of the lack of proper funding for military families, and it's hard enough to be home with your spouse and you're trying to deal with children and household items, but if your spouse is away on military duty, it's something we cannot even imagine. But
when I first heard that reporting, I was really, really shocked that some military families do rely on federal food benefits to supplement what they are able to buy for their families.
Yes, and also, Joan, if we can go back to the 1776 check that was cut for our military personnel as a gift by Trump, that money was supposed to have been used to upgrade military family housing on bases, which to stop the mold and to correct the electrical problems and just the wear and tear in those buildings. So when Trump takes from one place and he's stealing from another. But one more thing, if I may, Joan, Tammy Duckworth made that speech, and I've said this forever, and you know it. She's the one who should run for president next time coming up. She's undefeatable. Her credentials are impeccable. And who was it? Bruce Springsteen did a song. It's a sailing song. I think it's Mother Murphy, but it's a story of a widowed mother whose son goes off to battle in the Navy, and it goes "Tura ture, tura ture." He gave up his two fine legs today, and Joan she could play that as her theme song, and with her credentials, and she doesn't take nothing from nobody. I don't care who's up there going against her. She'll tear them down, plain and simple.
She speaks very plainly, doesn't she?
Yes.
I like that about her. I like everything about her. And I think you're right. I think she's obviously already one of those most successful female politicians, elected officials of our current era. And while I'm always saying that I think we're too misogynistic as a country to elect a woman, she could just possibly be the exception to that rule. Interesting conversation. Thanks for the call. I appreciate you calling in today. You're welcome. From Michigan, let's go to Franklin Park, where Al is on the line. Hi, Al. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good, Joan. I was just going to say a few things. You said it was a Benford that had problems. That's actually a gas-powered ship with 500 people on it. And that still seems like a lot of people. And whereas Abraham Lincoln has up to 5,000.
Yeah, well, Abraham Lincoln is an aircraft carrier. Benford is a destroyer.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, correct. So they're different. And, and even some of our cruise ships that people go on, they have 3,000 people on them, but obviously a whole lot of a different design. But that's just a little bit to be said about difference in sizes and things that we're dealing with. And then my other point was on the media and just on how I'm sure glad that there aren't that many people that have time to pay attention to what's on all these different TV channels like Salem News Channel, like Newsmax, like Fox. They're all busy doing other things because, the stuff it is on that is just so ridiculous and so pro-Trump and everything. You there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. And that was my point. And just that it's all about getting people out to vote. And Richard had a good analogy this morning where he was saying we have a tug of rope and we have to get more people on our side of the rope.
Yeah.
and so we can pull on that rope better. And that's what all about. The elections are all showing that people want to be more progressive, but we got to get our message out there in our media, and that's hard to do because they just throw so much money at the media right now. Look at like one of the things we missed in 2024 was Turning Point USA and how influential Charlie Kirk was. And that brought the numbers down and all the other things that they do against us. But when we get out and vote, we win. And that's what
Al, you make a great
happen.
Point. Turnout, turnout.
Yes.
When we can get people to turn out for an election in large numbers, Democrats win. Thank you for making that point, Al. It is a very, very good point for us. I need to take a break. We're going to be back with many more calls right after this.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive. Every weekday afternoon from 2 to 5 p.m. on WCPT 820.
CNN is reporting that Donald Trump is speaking to the media and announcing that talks with Iran are halted. I'm not sure Iran has said that they were actually talking to anybody. So, what does that mean? Does that mean he's going to start bombing again? If he tries to use the Marines or whomever to take over Karg Island, which is where they do a lot of their refining, because of the terrain, literally every military man and woman, well, not that many women anymore, I've seen interviewed, said that that would be a bloodbath. It would be a bloodbath to put boots on the ground to try to take Karg Island. So what's he going to do? Who knows? He's halting talks that may not have even been happening. Okay? But he hasn't said today that he's still thinking about bombing our mediator. Oman, the country of Oman, has been trying to mediate this agreement between us and Iran. And he felt that they were not putting his ideas high up on the list of things that were important. So he got really mad at them and said that he was going to bomb them, because that's what you do. The person who is trying to negotiate a peace for you, you threaten them. You threaten their livelihood. You threaten their lives. Yeah. Yep. That's where we are. Let us go to Chicago, where Ron is on the line. Hello, Ron.
Oh, yes. Because of the war in Iran, our strategic oil and gas reserves are almost depleted. And now Trump's priority is trees. He wants to replace all the trees around the White House.
Yes. Trees are very important. Like everybody says, this guy would have made a great first lady. He wants to build things. He wants to decorate things. He wants to plant trees. He wants to revamp. He wants to redo. He doesn't want to govern.
No. And he owns stock in the oil and gas companies. So every time the price of gas goes up, he makes money. So
that wouldn't surprise me. That wouldn't surprise me. I mean, a lot of the money that he and his family have made is believed to be a result of insider trading. He knows he's going to make, I mean, forget about this $100,000 a month to get his Truth Social posts. His whole family, they know what he's going to say ahead of time. That's why the guy who runs his prompter was indicted by the federal government, because he was insider trading. If he is, do you think the family's not?
Okay. Thank you much.
Thanks, Ron. Appreciate it. Let's go to Dave, who's on the line from Hoffman Estates. Hello, Dave.
Hey, Joan, I got a couple of things. I'll try to be quick so how this thing get through it. You see where Trump's whining prevailed again. The U.S. is to end major military exercise in South Korea after just 5 days at the U.S. request.
Yep. Because, we wouldn't want to make North Korea mad. We wouldn't want to alienate them.
No. And I was reading this morning this from Robert Reich. I'll give you the Reader's Digest version, but he said about Trump, he says, we've been shocked and outraged by his lack of morality, scruple, and shame. It's been difficult to conceive of such a person because we've always been taught to distinguish right from wrong and do the right thing. Yet Trump has no conception of right and wrong. He isn't unethical. He's non-ethical. Mm-hmm. He isn't immoral. He's amoral. And if he is no longer responsible for what he says or does, we should move beyond shock and outrage to outright fear. Mm-hmm. He could blow the world up. We must call on our elected representatives to remove him from office via the 25th Amendment as soon as possible by reason of insanity. And when I was on the line reading, I got to reading this one. New research by the Center on Privacy and Technology at Georgetown Law found that the U.S. Department of Homeland Security has collected the DNA of more than 3.3 million people, with the program's primary purpose not revolving around immigration enforcement, but to build a national DNA database for solving crimes.
Because, the Trump administration has told us that the immigrants that they're taking into custody, they're all murderers and rapists.
But if I read this right, though, it's not them. It's U.S. citizens.
And, I used to talk about this a lot, and I haven't talked about it for a while, but I think it was, I don't know. It was in the New York Times or Wall Street Journal. A guy who had voted for Trump 3 times. He's all in on Trump. He was all in on Trump getting, and he said mostly for his stance on immigration. He wanted all the bad immigrants gone. Well, here's the irony. Guess who ICE took into custody? His wife. His wife. She had... she was in the process of applying for a green card, which, as soon as she should have done that first thing. But the green card hadn't been approved yet, which makes her undocumented enough. She was, I forget where she was flying in from, but ICE took her into custody at the airport. And this guy was like the usual Trump voter. Well, like it wasn't supposed to happen to me. It wasn't supposed to be my wife they took into custody. It was supposed to be all those murderers and rapists that they were going to take into custody. That's why I voted for Donald Trump 3 times. And now he doesn't, his wife, she was moved to a detention facility. He's been hiring lawyers in a desperate attempt to get her out. Nobody knows. Last time I read about it, nobody knew whether or not he was going to get her out or whether she was going to end up being deported. So, yeah. There you go. It was
like,
supposed to be the other guy who was supposed to suffer.
Kind of like that one poem that first they came for the protesters, and I didn't say nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Then they came for the Hispanics, and I didn't say nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Then they came for my family, but there was nobody to help save them,
Yep.
But, hey, Joan, on that election in Wisconsin with that Hong, do you think by some chance that some of them that voted for her may have been Republicans to try to fudge up her numbers better? So, I don't know how they do their voting there, if you can vote either or. I
mean, she was defeated by David Crowley, and there's no way of knowing if people take a ballot of the other party. But the polling was what put her, at one point they put her 40 points ahead. So, I don't know even if you could be a Republican and grab a Democratic ballot, unless there were a ton of people who were lying to the pollsters.
I don't know. That's just, that's my question, because, how everybody's freaking out with the Democratic Socialists, and it just figuring they could featherbed the road a little quicker for their guy. But and I'm kind of concerned of the one in Florida now, the one that beat
Angie Nixon, that beat Alexander Vindman.
Yeah, I'm kind of worried about that one.
Well, after the news, Aaron Kleinman is going to be here. He's a senior political reporter and the all-around data guy for Heartland Signal, and we are going to talk about some of the races from the most recent set of primaries, and that is definitely one we're going to talk about. I'm really interested in what he has to say. Yeah.
Hey, Joan, I'll close out with this one, a little humor for you. The other night I seen, it was a great comment or post by comedian Chelsea Handler. She said, Melania supposedly got her citizenship on an Einstein visa. She said, I think they misspelled it. It wasn't an Einstein, but an Epstein visa.
Oh, God.
She was good.
Yes.
All right, I thought I'd leave you with a little chuckle there. Anyway,
Thank you, Dave.
Have a good one,
I'll
Joan.
use a smile today. Thank you for the call.
All right.
Let's go to Matson, Illinois, where Mike is on the line. Hi, Mike. Thank you for calling in today.
Hey, hi. It's amazing. You report on all these unnamed sailors, unnamed families. I got a nephew on that boat, and they're getting 3 square meals a day. There's nearly 200 toilets on that boat, almost 100 miles of sewage plumbing, and then you got 3 out of 5,000 that miss their mommies, okay? So, the fact that you keep reporting this stuff just shows that you people don't.
Well, actually, the Military Times did name one of the families came forward. It was, they interviewed the wife of the guy who apparently jumped off the ship. And she talked about how the Navy had been his life, and she was terrified that because of this apparent suicide attempt that they were going to discharge him and give him a dishonorable discharge. So, there was at least one family that did come forward by name.
Okay, tell me something that doesn't happen in the military ever. Any of the military guys listening out there know. There's guys that want to kill themselves during basic training.
So are you saying that there's absolutely no problems on the USS Abraham Lincoln? Is that your argument?
There's problems on every boat that's out to sea during naval operations. What I'm focusing on is the fact that there's over probably 200 toilets on that boat and over 100 miles of pipe, and the fact that maybe a pipe gets caught up or a toilet gets broken doesn't change the fact that these men and women on board aren't able to use the bathroom, and they're getting 3 squares a day. So stop with the semantics and do some damn research.
Well, I do my damn research, Mike. How about you do a little reading other than just Fox News and MAGA? And by the way, there are more than 5,000 people on that aircraft carrier. And even if there are 200 working toilets, that's not good math. But hey, thanks for the call. Always great to talk to somebody who hasn't done their own research and just is talking off the top of their head. Huh. Okay. Well, that was exciting. Let's go to Debbie, who's on the line from Old Town. Hey, Debbie, how are you?
Hey, Joan. I'm great. How are you doing?
Well, I'm better now that I'm hearing your voice.
Oh, you're a sweetheart. You always are. You had the best guests, and you had the most diversified group of guests. You do so much research, and I appreciate everything you present to us. It's unbelievable.
Well, Mike, if you're still listening, go to themilitarytimes.com. Maybe that's a source you can believe. But now, Debbie, I'm all yours. What's going on?
Oh, that's scary. Anyway, there is a company called Media Strategies, and they are admitting that they skewed the polls in Wisconsin as a social experiment.
What?
And yes, it's called Media Strategies. I have a whole thing on it. Monday, they actually pulled out of all this. Organization that released public election polling, its record would withdraw the results of two of the surveys, saying that it was a social experiment. They wanted to see how people would react.
Oh, well, that's interesting. That's definitely something I'm going to have to look into. And I'm going to ask, Aaron Kleinman is our polling and primary expert. I'm going to ask him about that. Thanks for the heads up. I appreciate that. I want to try to squeeze one more call in. Our good friend Steve's on the line from the Gold Coast. Hey, Steve. Steve?
Well, okay. So, hello. Do you hear me?
Hi. Yes, I can hear you.
Hello?
Yes, I'm here.
Great. So, Darlene Graham had her Wasilla, Alaska moment, unfortunately. And, I would think that in this day and age that someone would understand how to properly vet people. And, so for those people who may have forgotten, the McCain campaign in 2008 needed a shot of adrenaline. They decided to go out and find somebody who would excite voters. They found a certain governor from the state of Alaska and Sarah Palin. They thought that they would energize the campaign. Unfortunately, nobody bothered to ask her if she knew anything about public policy, domestic or foreign. And, it was a complete disaster. They finally came up with a solution whereby, instead of trying to teach her, to give her what would be an undergraduate course in political science, they said, look, there are like 40 or 50 questions you might get asked. All she has to do is memorize these answers, and you don't have to know anything about the actual topic. So this actually worked for them. I'm surprised that nobody bothered to do it for Miss Graham.
I am
the idea
shocked.
That in this day and age,
does she not have people advising her? Did they not do some kind of debate prep for her? I mean, it's basic media training 101 to say, look, you might be hit with a question that we haven't foreseen and that stumps you. Here are a couple of different ways that you can answer a question if it's not something that you know anything about, if it's a question that stumps you. Here's a good way to get out of that situation. Any basic media trainer does that.
Yeah, pivot to something else at the very least, and see if you can, if you don't like the question, then change the question, change the topic. But here, like I say, it was a Sarah Palin moment where, Sarah Palin, according to Nicole Wallace and Steve Schmidt, didn't know who was on which side in the Second World War.
Would you remember when Katie Couric was interviewing Sarah Palin and said, where do you get your information? What are the news sources that you read about? And she looked at Katie Couric like Katie Couric had just said, which ostrich is your favorite in the zoo? And she clearly, the answer was clearly that she didn't read anything.
Exactly. What kind of an adult who is the governor of a state in this country doesn't know what the New York Times is? Even if you don't read the New York Times or the Washington Post, the Chicago Tribune, you never had to have read them. Just know that they exist so that you can rattle them off. But it's just disturbing the kind of people that we have run for office in this country.
Yeah. It can be. Steve, thank you so much for the call. We need to get to the news. We will be back with Aaron and lots of primary questions right after this.
It's time for Joan Esposito. Live, local, and progressive.
Joan, as always, exceptional work from you from, your TV days all the way up to today. You're truly exceptional, and thanks for this great show you have.
It's time for Joan Esposito on WCPT 820, Chicago's Progressive Talk.
We love to talk to senior political reporter for Heartland Signal, Aaron Kleinman, after a bunch of primaries, though he is usually exceedingly sleep deprived, which often makes for a very interesting conversation. So how are you today, Aaron? Do you need some coffee?
I'm actually good because, Florida usually counts pretty quickly. They learned their lesson after 2000. And the other, there was Wyoming and then Alaska. They don't report till like 4 a.m. And I'm like, you know what? I could just wake up early and figure that one out. So I got my 8 hours. I'm good. Let's get into it.
Hey, before we get into the actual primaries, I got a call during the calling portion of our program from somebody who told me about median strategies. I looked it up on, of course, that very reliable source, Wikipedia. And here's what they start with. Median Strategies, a company which initially described itself as a pollster and later as a short-term social experiment. In August, it released purported results of public opinion polls in the 2026 Los Angeles mayoral election and the 2026 gubernatorial elections in Wisconsin and Nevada. Then a few days later, retracted all of its releases, stating all previously published polling releases have been withdrawn and should not be cited or treated as genuine polling data. It was an experiment. I'm not quite sure what the scientific experiment was supposed to accomplish, but that's really weird. What do you know about this?
Yeah, well, I've been online long enough to, anytime someone I remember 25 years ago, you'd be on the forums and someone make a dumb post. They'd be like, well, I was doing a social experiment to show how people would react to what this was, like classic excuse online. But I mean, there's unfortunately things that you can exploit right now. A lot of people get polling information from these aggregators that you might have seen on Twitter. That put out, whenever someone sends them a release, they'll put it out. They won't vet it at all. And the reason why someone would do this is because there are now prediction markets where you can bet on outcomes of elections. And so they put these out.
Put those together.
They try to change the odds in these, bet accordingly, and try to make some money off of this.
Wow.
So for everyone out there, again, I would say those polling aggregators that you see on Twitter, they're pretty dubious. There's a website that I use called 50+1. I would go there if you ever just want to see the latest polling. They do a good job of vetting what's real and what's not. They're made up of people that were at 538 before ABC shut it down. And then the prediction markets themselves, which, by the way, they have their own kind of right-wing views on things. Like Polymarket, one of the bigger ones, was, anti-vaccine, putting out anti-vaccine messaging. So, I certainly wouldn't trust those websites, especially their official communications, to tell you what's going on. And, this is actually a pretty good segue, Joan, because did you know that these websites gave Alex Vindman around a 100% chance of winning the Florida Senate primary last night?
Oh, wow. And that's not exactly what happened. And here again, we've talked about the panic, or at least the panicked headlines. Democratic Socialists won in Florida. Oh my God, the sky is falling. Angie Nixon defeated Alexander Vindman, who was, of course, the centrist moderate Democrat. And now we've elected another Democratic Socialist. Ooh, everybody be afraid. Be afraid. We've actually got a sound clip from Angie Nixon. She was talking about the Democratic Socialist label. Let's talk about her after we listen to this.
Anti-American, destabilizing, destroying the country. What's your plan to combat that messaging?
Well, first of all, I look forward to Ashley Moody calling me senator in November. And secondly, Ashley Moody actually used 10 million of our dollars that were supposed to go towards the most medically needy kids in our state to divert that funding and to defeat ballot initiatives that the citizens placed on the ballot. And so Ashley Moody doesn't care about anything but herself. We continue to see her net worth increase Meanwhile, Floridians across our state, their net worth is going down. They have absolutely nothing in their savings account. She won't even hold town hall meetings unless they're Republicans. I am someone who's willing to go out and talk to everyone, even if they don't believe how I believe ideologically, because I want to represent all Floridians here in the state of Florida. Many people who have called and reached out to Ashley Moody's office for help, you know who they call? Because she doesn't return their call. They call me. They email me, and we help connect them to the resources that they need. And so I'm not running away from the people, I'm running to them. And I look forward to becoming their next United States Senator come November.
Well, a Democratic nominee who wants to be called governor in your state is David Jolly, and he praised you as a fighter. But he also said that he flatly rejects socialism. How do you plan to unite the party around your campaign right now?
Again, it is not about labels. It's about the most basic rights that people here in the state need. They need housing. Right now here in our state, it costs over 18% of the national average to rent a home or to rent an apartment here. People are paying 300 more times for property insurance here in the state of Florida. We witnessed Ashley Moody fail to extend the ACA subsidies, which caused nearly 300,000 people to be knocked off of the Affordable Care Act rolls. She doesn't care about anyone but herself. And also, she did that because her campaign donors are health insurance companies. And so I look forward, Ashley Moody, to taking you on and to whooping you in November, and you will be calling me your senator.
Ooh, tough talk. What do we think, Aaron? Tell me what to think.
Well, I can only give you the facts and let you decide for yourself.
Come on.
So Angie Nixon, obviously you can see there, she is a very charismatic and compelling speaker. And that's why she beat Alex Vindman, who is not. Alex Vindman outspent her about 20-1 in that primary, and he lost because he just didn't have her ability to organize. And also, some things to keep in mind, Angie Nixon, she is Black. She really got significant margins in northern Florida, where most of the Democratic primary voters are Black, and she also in South Florida, where you have a very well organized Black community that really turned out for her. So her nomination is also kind of a testament to Black voters being really energized right now, very mad at Calais and overturning the VRA, and in Florida in particular, they re-gerrymandered the state after that decision. So it speaks to that as well. But she has a very, very uphill climb. Florida is a very expensive state. You have the Miami TV market. You have the Orlando TV market. You have the Tampa Bay St. Petersburg TV market. You have the Jacksonville TV market. And you have a bunch of other smaller ones that you need to be in order to, be on television and get in front of most people. Alex Vindman outspent her 20-1. But one of the reasons why he lost is that spending only like a few $1 million on TV in Florida actually doesn't get you very far. It doesn't get you in front of most people. And it certainly seems like she's not going to get a ton of money here. And so I wouldn't say that I wouldn't say it's impossible for her to win, if only because, the economy seems to be getting worse. If we're in a recession and the bottom falls out, a lot comes into play, but Florida has been trending right. It's an expensive state. Ashley Moody is less controversial than a lot of other Republican candidates, and Democrats looking across the country at potential options, of reach Senate seats to flip. Florida went 14 points for Trump. There may be better options in much cheaper states like Nebraska or Kansas or in Idaho, you have an independent. In South Dakota, you have an independent. In Montana, there's a wonky three-way race. And then they're looking at, you could advertise in all of those for the same cost. It would cost to advertise in Florida alone. And so it's going to be she's not going to have many resources. And I think unless there's, the national environment gets even worse for Republicans, it's just going to be really hard for her to break through.
This is supposed to be a change election. This is supposed to be an election where even popular Republicans may be voted out of office because people are they want something new and different. So why wouldn't PACs or the Democratic Party support Angie Nixon? Give her a chance.
It's because, they see themselves as having better options in other states. That's why, in Florida, like I said, it's going to cost you, in order to get in front of everyone for like the last few weeks of the election, it's going to cost about like $40 million. In a state like Kansas, for example, where you have, Adam Hamilton won the primary there. He's the minister in the largest church in the state. He's shown crossover appeal. There's a poll showing him, I think, down 1 point against Roger Marshall. In Kansas, you have the Kansas City market, and then you have like Wichita and Topeka, and like the rest is, pretty cheap. And so, for $40 million, you could saturate that state for, the last 2 months of the election pretty much. So when you decide between Kansas and Florida, if you think you have about even odds in each, you'd much rather go Kansas just because it's so much cheaper. It's unfortunate for Angie Nixon that she is kind of a poison chalice getting the Democratic nomination in Florida, because the big money people really want to, they don't want to throw their money down the drain. And Florida is just, they've come so close and been burned so many times in Florida. It's just going to be tough to persuade people to spend there instead of cheaper states.
Do you think Alexander Vindman would have gotten a war chest?
Well, I mean, he had something of one. He did have a national name. He was using kind of the high pressure campaign fundraising tactics that all of the listeners really don't like. If you have a phone or an email account, you've gotten texts and emails from him, and I'm sure you're fed up with them, but they do seem to work, even though they are, there have been stories out about how it's a very unethical practice. But he's able to raise, I think, $14 million, which again, it's not much in Florida, but if he was able to keep doing that, he would have been able to, maybe persuade more people to donate. Angie Nixon raised less than $1 million. She's not going to become a superstar fundraiser overnight. And so I think Democrats just looking to kind of, where can we be competitive? Florida becomes an easy state to triage.
Yeah. And you are correct. I do get those texts. I get them on a daily basis, multiple times a day. And I don't even read them anymore. I just hit delete and label as spam, but they just keep coming. Once in a while, I even get them from Trump, which, who's buying my information? That's what I want to know. Because if you're a Republican entity and you bought my phone number, I want to tell you that's a waste of your money. But yeah, I hear you. I know what you mean. Oh, we are, because I am a broadcast professional, we are way overdue for a break. Aaron Kleiman and I will be right back after this.
Now back to Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
Our senior political reporter for Heartland Signal is Aaron Kleinman. He also follows all the primaries and takes us through all the races. You can sign up for his newsletter, Radio Free America. Go to heartlandsignal.com. And I know, Aaron, that you had a chat with Andy, and one of the things Andy told me that you mentioned about this race we were just talking about, Vindman and Nixon, that it might help national Dems not to have Vindman as the nominee. Why?
They'll face a lot more pressure. They would, if he were the nominee again, he's been on MS Now a lot. People know him from the first Trump impeachment. They would have faced a lot of pressure to spend in Florida when, again, for people like you and me, we remember when Florida was, deciding presidential elections. But it is these days, it's about as Republican as, like I said, Nebraska or Kansas, two states that are just much cheaper to advertise in. And so taking pressure off national Democrats to really invest a lot of money in Florida frees up resources that could go to other states where, they probably have a similar chance of winning, but are just a lot cheaper to advertise in. And, the Senate, it's got the rural state bias, which is, very unfortunate and distorts our politics. But, it means that Senate seat in Kansas counts just as much as that Senate seat in Florida. And so, it probably makes a lot of sense to put that money in Kansas instead of Florida if you're looking for reach opportunities.
Well, before we walk away from Florida, let's talk about the primary for the Republican nominee to run for governor in that state.
Yeah. So Byron Donalds, is going to be the nominee, but, he had pretty much all of the institutional support and he barely got above 50%. one of the other candidates running against him is a guy named James Fishback, who's like a right-wing troll. And he got 10% of the vote statewide. So like, okay, whatever, who cares? But a really interesting thing, a really kind of scary thing is that he won like all the precincts around Florida State University. So like all the like under 25 Republicans are voting for like this guy who's, got deeply regressive views on like just about everything. He was, I think, fired from a job for misconduct with an underage girl or something. I don't want to. Yeah, like I want to be careful about what I say there. It was like something along those lines. I don't want to get into specifics because I forget the exact specifics, but it was very unseemly. Just really kind of gross guy. And so you can kind of see where the Republican Party is headed when, again, the entire Florida State campus is voting for this guy. You want to talk about, Democratic socialists are so popular in Western Queens and New York City. I mean, look at James Fishback and compare him to the most insane Democrat you've known, and it's similar. It's similarly alarming, more alarming than the furthest left person you can find, and he is winning over the youngest Republicans, which is just kind of terrifying. But also, back in that race, there's another candidate in there, Jay Collins. He didn't really do very well, but you can see on the map of where primary results came in, the most rural parts of Florida all voted against Donalds, or he got less great margins there. And, Donalds is black. And you wonder, are Florida Republicans going to come out in the midterms to vote for Byron Donalds? It's a decent question. And, Trump's not on the ballot. The Senate campaign doesn't, look very exciting. So, maybe in the gubernatorial race where Democrats do have a well-funded candidate, Dave Jolly, I know he was on WCPT recently, maybe Democrats kind of have a better shot at the Florida gubernatorial election than we thought.
Okay, that makes perfect sense to me. I understand now. I do have a friend who went to that college, and I am going to be talking to her and getting her take on that, because that is just so bizarre to me. I want to continue on. I want to speak with you about what has been described as the ugliest primary in the country, or as Vox put it, the worst primary in America. Talk about that one, if you would.
Yeah, so I don't know if you're familiar with Randy Fine, a congressman from Florida.
The name sounds vaguely familiar.
He is, if the Israeli politician Itamar Ben-Gvir were an American, he'd be Randy Fine. Like, he is kind of represents almost like the furthest right part of the Israeli politics spectrum. He has mapped that onto the United States in terms of he basically thinks that Palestinians are subhuman. He has talked about nuking them. When he was first elected in a special election, he underperformed the top, Trump by like 20% or something. He's just a deeply unpleasant guy. And he was facing off in the primary against Dan Bilzerian, who, it's very unfortunate how many people that I thought were a joke 20 years ago I now have to take seriously.
Isn't that amazing? Same here.
Yeah. So Bilzerian, he's like, like this clavicular kid. He was like the proto, he was the proto clavicular. He was this guy who would just like pop up on Instagram with like ridiculously ripped dude who's like had some type of plastic surgery and like talk about parties he was going to in Las Vegas. Now he is a deeply anti-Semitic podcaster who basically ran against Fine, he praised Hitler during the campaign. And these guys are really showing you kind of what's going on in the Republican primary right now. You have Randy Fine and Dan Bilzerian. And I think, what this really shows is that there's very little, almost zero constituency within the Republican Party, or at least within MAGA, for people who actually want peace in the Middle East. You either have people who think, that Palestinians shouldn't exist, and you have people who think that Jews shouldn't exist. Though that's what the fight is within the Republican Party. There is, and we just got through a pretty nasty primary in Michigan between Haley Stevens and Abdul El Sayed. I think both of them said that they want peace in Israel and Palestine. They might disagree about how to get there, but they don't want people to keep killing each other there. Whereas on the Republican side, the two sides represented by Randy Fine and Dan Bilzerian, they do want people to keep killing each other there. That's the difference between the parties right now.
And just, I know we're not talking about El Sayed since that race is over, but I think that he, with what he says and the kinds of commercials he's running, I think he's really working hard to convince people who think that Muslims are bad and evil. And what is it, Laura? Doesn't Laura Loomer want them just removed from this country? I think that's one of her new things is anybody who follows the religion of Islam has no business being in the United States. But I think he's doing what needs to be done. He's got his own followers. He doesn't have to worry about them. But the people who might be, I don't know, I don't know. Yeah. Look at him and look at his name. I think he is trying to win them over by showing them in many ways, look, I'm just like you. I'm just like you.
Yeah. And he has, a benefit too, where, he's from Southeast Michigan. The Arab, the Middle Eastern, North African community in Southeast Michigan is pretty well established. It's been there for decades. I think if you grew up there, you probably know people who have Arabic sounding names. People who are practicing Muslims, that's just kind of part of your experience there. So he has that going for him, that he's not just this totally alien thing to the people of Southeast Michigan. But yeah, he does still kind of need to show himself as hey, they just spent $60 million against me in this primary. I'm about to show you that, hey, I'm not this scary outsider. I am, he's the guy who grew up in the Detroit suburbs and played lacrosse at the University of Michigan and came back home and worked for the Wayne County, Public Health Administration. And that's what he understands. That's what he has to do. And there were some polls showing him down right after the primary by at least a few points. And I think that's any candidate should assume work like you're down a few points. Mm-hmm. And I think he is doing that. And we've actually gotten a couple of polls since then showing him up. Though, again, you throw them all into the average. And again, these are actual pollsters I've heard of before, pollsters, who have been vetted. Yeah. But yeah, GBAO and Susquehanna polling have both shown him up 6 or 7 points after Beacon and Shaw and Epic MRA showed him down 3 to 4 points. And so, yeah, it's a year where Republicans are polling very poorly nationwide. Michigan is a naturally kind of purple state. So you'd expect him to have some, he should have kind of some structural advantages, but he did just get out of this very nasty primary. Maybe there is some latent Islamophobia that could cost him votes. And so, yeah, he has to work to make sure that he gets the votes that he needs.
Aaron Kleinman and I have all but blown through a commercial break, but Devin is going to rescue us by taking it right now. We'll be back after this.
Don't turn that dial. Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive, returns right now.
A fair balance where the facts come out.
On WCPT 820.
Our senior political reporter and overall data man, Aaron Kleinman, is here. He puts out a newsletter once a week. Go to heartlandsignal.com and sign up for Radio Free America. We are here talking primaries. One of the people that I see, no matter, it seems like what channel I turn my television to, is Debbie Wasserman Schultz. This woman, Aaron, is everywhere. And her name is vaguely familiar, but I really haven't followed her career. Tell me about Debbie Wasserman Schultz.
Yeah, she's Democrats' bad penny. They can't get rid of her. So she kind of rose to fame initially in 2016 when she was put in charge of the DNC under Obama. Obama had this idea, it's the DNC, it's this backwater. I'm just going to put, the political hack in charge of it and ignore it. And that was a huge mistake because, in that time, there was, a belief within most Democratic circles that Hillary Clinton would be the nominee. Everyone's just going to kind of circle the wagons around her. Debbie Wasserman Schultz as head of the DNC at the time, was part of that. The DNC was also in charge of, ensuring that there was supposed to be a fair primary in the 2016, even though they all thought it'd be a coronation for Hillary Clinton. Bernie Sanders comes through and, all of a sudden it's like, hey, maybe Hillary Clinton wasn't as unanimously popular among Democrats as we thought. And there were some very ham-handed attempts to kind of try to, close ranks behind her, even in light of that. And thanks to, the Podesta email hack and WikiLeaks, people got the emails involving her and showing her, really kind of biased against Bernie and, not very competently trying to steer the DNC heading into a disastrous election for the country. You would think that this might end her political career, but it hasn't. She's now, she's kept winning re-election in Florida. And again, the latest round of gerrymandering eliminated her old seat. And she decided that she would run in a seat that for the last 30 plus years has been held by a Black Democrat. She won the primary for that seat. And, now there will be one less Black Democrat from the South, thanks to Debbie Wasserman Schultz, seeking to continue her own political career, even though she really has not done much for the Democratic Party and has, in fact, been pretty bad on net for it. So Florida Democrats have, another reason why national Democrats don't want to go into Florida is that the state party does not have the best reputation for, putting forward and electing the most effective lawmakers.
Okay. If this is a traditionally Black area, why did the African-American candidate, Luther Campbell, not do better?
Well, Luther Campbell was one of, he's the most famous one there. If anyone here has listened to Two Live Crew before, but there were I think 4 serious Black candidates for that seat, and they split the vote, and Debbie Wasserman Schultz won with a plurality.
And, the DNC, correct me if I'm wrong, and I know this is a little bit off topic, isn't their whole reason for living fundraising? I mean, basically, they do a couple of other things. They're supposed to help with candidates at some point, but aren't they just fundraising?
Yeah, well, it's not only fundraising, but it's ensuring that money goes where it's supposed to is a big part of the job. And so, I mean, you can see that Wasserman Schultz, even though she kind of got the boot from the DNC a decade ago, she still has those fundraising connections, and that certainly helped her. But the main things it does is it raises money, especially for the presidential campaign. And then again, it's supposed to organize a fair presidential primary, which she very much did not do.
Interesting. So do you think that because she won in the primary, that means Democrats will lose? Because will the African-American population, when assuming they do come out in the midterms, that they will be angry about what happened?
No, I mean, I think that seat, it's kind of it's a humiliating thing that, she is representing that seat. But you have to remember that, again, Angie Nixon did amazingly well among Black voters in the Democratic primary. And, she has really, the reason why she won that is she's just been barnstorming the state, trying to make connections wherever she can through organizing. And so, it'll be tough for her to kind of get the word out, as wide as she could. But, she still, can help turn out those voters. And again, those voters seem like they're turning out regardless of who's on the ballot. They're just mad because, the Voting Rights Act was gutted. We saw this in Tennessee. In the primaries there. We saw this in South Carolina in the primaries there. Black voters are turning out higher than we anticipated. That likely is because the VRA got gutted.
Is it true that you referred to Florida as the state, which is the graveyard of empires?
It's, having worked at the work.
I love that.
The local, they elect so many crummy Democrats is a big problem. There were 3 former state lawmakers, Kim Daniels, James Bush, and Daphne Campbell. We can't get into all 3 of them on this show, but if you guys want to subscribe to the newsletter, I'll provide you links for it, and you can just look them up. They have a habit of, really just kind of humiliating the party and also voting with Republicans on a lot of issues. And it, it can be very tough to win in a state like that. And my experience there is that there's a real problem where pretty much all of the political spending is done through like a shadowy cabal of PACs that you basically have no idea who's running them. The campaign finance laws there are just very, very loose in that regard. And so I think that just makes it hard to have like any accountability like within the party for like, who is funding what, who's aligned with whom. There's just so opaque, we don't know. It's all a big shell game there. And so it just becomes very difficult to like get good candidates through in Florida. And it's such a hard state to work in for that reason. And also the Democratic Party there, because it's all, all the spending is done through these kind of like shadow organizations. The party in particular is just very weak. There's no one to really kind of like mediate this and like try to make it so that candidates align with the values that we expect. I'm not expecting, oh, you have to agree with X, Y, and Z, but like, don't vote with Republicans on everything at the very least. There's just no disciplining function there. So it's a very frustrating state to work in. So I think a lot of Democrats, when they saw Angie Nixon beating Alex Vindman, they're like, well, I'm relieved because I'm not going to get that pressure to spend there.
We are going to take a break, and I am going to start working on my own evil cabal. Aaron Kleinman and I will be right back. And Aaron, I have to think about whether or not you're going to be invited to be in the evil cabal. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. We'll talk about it later. We'll be right back after this.
Now back to Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive.
I wouldn't trust anybody else.
On WCPT 820.
You should sign up for Radio Free America. Go to heartlandsignal.com. It is a newsletter that Aaron Kleinman puts out once a week. He is our senior Heartland Signal political reporter. We are talking about the primaries. Thank God we are finished with Florida. I'm done with Florida in so many ways. Yeah. So where should we go? I like Alaska. I know we need to talk about Wyoming too, but I think what is going on in Alaska is very interesting. What do you think, Mr. Kleinman?
So Alaska, you're right. Alaska's fascinating because for a long time, it's voted Republican at the presidential level. It had the last time it voted for a Democratic presidential nominee was 1964. But it has shown a willingness to elect Democrats statewide before, including Mary Petlola, who is ahead, so they have kind of a all-party primary in August, and then the top four candidates there advance to the general, and there's a runoff conducted there, so kind of, so ultimately it comes down to the two highest vote getters. And Petlola, she's looked very strong in early returns from the August primary in Alaska. Like she's going to finish in first with the most votes, and they're still counting votes. And in Alaska, it's a very big state, as you may know, and the votes that from the furthest flung areas take a longer time to get in. And in Alaska, the rural areas are some of the most Republican because it tends to have a high Native population, and so it looks like Alaska, she might get more than 50% in this primary, which is a great sign heading into November that she can get a majority of the vote in Alaska, and that would be a really critical state to flipping in order to get to his majority in the Senate.
I've seen one of Mary's ads, and it feels to me that at least a little bit she's kind of channeling Lisa Murkowski, sort of like, we're Alaska and we're different, and maybe, they don't understand us, but we know what we need and we know what we want. We're Alaska, which I think for Alaska is a really good stand to take.
Yeah, I don't know if you've ever been. It is very different. Everything there is just
yes,
bigger
I have been
and more
to Alaska.
Remote.
It is delightful when the bugs aren't around.
Yeah, the state bird's the mosquito there.
Yeah, really. That's about how big they are.
So, again, it's a lot different from the continental U.S., and it can be very idiosyncratic. The state legislature for the past almost decade now has been run by a coalition of, independents that, and then they can kind of align themselves with the Republicans or the Democrats, and maybe even some breakaway Republicans or Democrats. It's a very kind of, it's very, it shifts a lot there in a way that it party designations are a lot more rigid in the lower 48 than they are in Alaska. And so you also might have Democrats win the governorship there for the first time in a long time, in I think decades, because the two main Democratic candidates for governor, Jonathan Christ-Tompkins and Tom Begich, they're the top two vote getters in that primary, and they'll probably get close to around 50% of the net vote when all the votes are counted. So Alaska as a state, maybe it is moving to the left. It's not a particularly religious state. It has a relatively high non-white population. So, maybe Alaska, is getting even more purple now. So it'll be a good state to watch, though. It's going to take a while to count all the votes there. So on election night, don't watch Alaska unless you really want to stay up for about a week.
Maybe people seem to be telling me that I'm reading too much into this, but I thought it was really interesting that when Kamala Harris did a big ad for her new PAC, one of the people she mentioned was Mary Peltola and said, this woman's great and we should get behind her. And so send me money for this new PAC. And Mary came out publicly and said, would really rather you didn't talk about me. You seem like a very nice person, but don't talk about me. I'm fine, all on my own, which I thought was very interesting. And if I were Kamala Harris, and God help us, is supposedly thinking about running again in 2028, I think I would say that to myself, maybe I'm not as popular as I need to be or that I thought I was. I mean, here's this person who doesn't want me to talk about them. Everybody seems to be telling me I'm reading way too much into this. So go ahead, pile on.
No, I don't. I mean, I think that is a really big red flag for Kamala Harris that, this candidate saying, I don't want you to talk, to speak about, there are other candidates, fresh faces that maybe Peltola would want to have raising money for her. Maybe someone like John Ossoff, maybe someone like Andy Beshear, maybe someone like Mark Kelly. Might be someone that she'd be like, oh, this is someone that I could see myself aligning with. And, I think as, pretty much as soon as polls close in November, we're going to be starting to talk about the 2028 Democratic presidential primary. And I think
within minutes, we will be doing
minutes. That. And I think it is worth kind of looking back at, who candidates in purple states and red states want to align themselves with, because that is the sign of a candidate that might have the crossover appeal that we need in 2028. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I think that is meaningful that she told Kamala Harris to back off. But yeah, and in general, anyone who's worked out of DC, anyone who's worked at national work knows that you got to let the local candidates run their own race. And Mary Peltola knows Alaska better than any of us, and you got to let her run the race that will win her votes in Alaska. And if that includes telling off Kamala Harris, you got to let her do that.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on to Wyoming. Honestly, a state that, at least politically, I don't pay a huge amount of attention to. So tell me what's going on there.
Well, Wyoming is, actually a real bright spot for the country. Now, you might be thinking this is the most Republican state in the country. What are you talking about? Well, in Wyoming, if you want to make a difference at all in state politics, you basically have to be a Republican. And so there are a lot of people in the Republican Party in Wyoming who, might feel, not necessarily at home with the National Party, but, they're like, hey, it's Wyoming. If I want to make a difference, I got to be a Republican. And for a long time, non-ideologues, people who just wanted the state government to function, maybe, conservative folks who might not see eye to eye with you and me on everything, but they want a functional state government, ran the state. That started to change when actually a few years ago, the hard right Freedom Caucus won a majority of votes, like a majority of seats in the state house. And, just like very austere budgets, culture war, destroying the state, basically, that type of stuff. And there was a real worry heading into last night that, they would strengthen themselves even more. And they didn't. I think it is now 14 state lawmakers in Washington, in Wyoming, that remember that hard right caucus lost their primaries. They nominated a moderate, the guy that Trump didn't endorse for governor. And moderate, being a relative term here, but so it seems like voters in Wyoming really have rejected the hard right republicanism, and I think that's good overall. I don't want to see people suffer. I don't want to see state governments collapse. In Wyoming, it is a not particularly wealthy state, and you need government intervention to help people there just like cope with the elements. And so it's good to see that, Republicans kind of moving away from the abyss a bit. And if Republicans move away from the abyss nationwide, that's overall good for America. And so I'm happy that they did this in Wyoming.
Excellent. We still have a little bit of time, so let's touch on the race in California to replace Eric Swalwell, somebody who seemed like such a rising star until he wasn't.
Yeah. Well, that it's one of those things where people say things, but it's not fit for publication, and so you can't really do anything about it. And that had been going on with Swalwell for a long time. And it's like, well, there are rumors going around about this guy, but they're rumors, so you can't say anything. And so you just kind of let them slide because he's not really particularly that important. Then he starts running for governor of California. People start going on the record, and boom, it's done. So yeah, there's a race to replace him. And it's another race where AIPAC weighed in. And again, they seem like they might be on the losing end again. Again, it's California. They'll take their time counting votes, but Aisha Wahab, it looks like she might be the next congresswoman from the East Bay. And so that's one to keep my eyes on. And then there was actually another special election last night, Joan. I don't know if you saw that, the one in Pennsylvania.
No. Tell me about it.
So in the state house in Pennsylvania, Democrats have had a 1-seat majority there for 4 years. 1 seat, and so that's been very hard sometimes, but they've been able to kind of pass a lot of bills. And, even though they really don't have much margin for error. Well, that's 3 seats now because Democrats flipped a suburban Pittsburgh seat that Trump won by 18 points in a special election.
And, I'm seeing the writing seems to be on the wall because I'm seeing that over and over again. Well, a Democrat won, but Trump took this area last time around by 9 points or 10 points or 15 points, or as you just said, 18 points. It does seem like the tide is turning.
Yeah,
I don't want to get out over my skis because, as you know, we have been crushed before.
Yeah, and in Pennsylvania, actually, this happened in 2018. We flipped a longtime Republican-held seat and then lost it in November. But back then, the margin didn't shift all that much. It shifted a few percentage points towards Republicans, and that ended up being enough. So, I think Democrats overall would be fine if there's a nationwide shift of 15 points instead of 19 points, And also, this seat has a lot of symbolic importance because, it is, an area that used to be one of the most conservative in the state. It's Butler County, not far from, Butler, PA. And it used to be represented by this guy named Darrell Metcalf, who was like one of the most obnoxious Republicans in the state legislature. And he was there before Trump. So he was like kind of like a proto-Trump. Trump was kind of, when Trump appears on the scene, he's talking like this guy has talked for a decade. And now a Democrat represents that seat. It's a district that, again, it's the Pittsburgh kind of, it's just to the north of the county line, Allegheny County. It's just to the north of that. And so it's an area that used to be so Republican, but you have more and more families moving there. You have more millennials moving there into the suburbs, and just the far right stuff just won't play there anymore. And by the way, the Republican there ran, he ran calling his opponent a socialist. That like the yard signs in the district was like, oh, Dukes is a socialist, vote for Timko. And it didn't work. So another thing to keep in mind as we head into November.
I know that there are still 4 states that have their primaries in September. Since states can change the date of their primary if they so choose, is there some advantage to being this late in the game?
No, It's bad for you. For the political party, it is very bad to have your primary this late. I think it was in 1996 in Massachusetts, there was a primary that was decided by double-digit votes total. It went to court. Democrats didn't know their nominee until a month before the election, and so it is a big disadvantage for a political party to have your primary in September. And
so why don't they change it?
New Hampshire is actually one of those states, and they actually are changing it. I think in 2028, their state primary is going to be in June. And yeah, the rest of these states, like Massachusetts, Delaware, I think it's inertia. And then they're also just, one-party states, like in Massachusetts, the Republican Party is almost irrelevant. And so, the Democrats, the real election is September anyway, so they don't see any need to move it. But yeah, it's not good for the parties to have them this late. And I think there used to be more late primaries, and parties have slowly seen that that's a bad idea.
Wisconsin used to be in September, and they decided to move it up all the way to mid-August. Whew. Man, those Wisconsinites, they are so radical.
Yeah. And Francesca Hong, probably grateful that they moved it to August, because if she'd had to stay in the race through September, who knows what else would have come out there.
Yeah.
But yeah. So this was the last big primary night of the year, and it was also the last major special election of the year. So right now it's just we got about, 12 weeks, 11 weeks until the midterms. And so,
I used to have the account. I was going day by day, but I've lost the will to live, so I no longer have that tally. But yeah, it's roughly 2 months and change.
Yeah, it sneaks up on you. So, Labor Day is the historic start of the general election sprint. This year, Republicans are having a midterm convention, September 9th and 10th, where they're going to try to make their case. And, everyone here at WCPT and Heartland, I think we'll be taking a pretty skeptical eye toward that. And I think we'll be covering, we'll be giving you a little dose of reality in, instead of letting them dominate the airwaves that week. But yeah, we're entering the home stretch here, folks.
Aaron, thank you so much. It is always a pleasure to talk about these races with you. Really appreciate you spending the time with us.
Thanks so much for having me on, Joan. Take care.
You too. And I will reconsider you for the evil cabal, okay?
Yes. All right.
We are going to take a break for news. We'll be back with more after this.
Esposito, live, local, and progressive.
I want somebody who's passionate. I want somebody who can talk to people like a real person, who can make people feel things, who can make people want to follow them.
It's time for Joan Esposito on WCPT 820, Chicago's Progressive Talk.
It is the third Wednesday of the month, and it is the time we set aside to speak with Spencer Critchley. Spencer, how are you?
I'm doing okay, Joan. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty well. I know you're a big music guy. So is my partner, Ray, and he is one of his 3 bands, she said sarcastically, as a non-music person, is performing tonight in our neighborhood at a free concert. So I am actually looking forward to walking over there with the neighbors. And I've always told him that I want to be, that I want to be somebody who follows him because of my love for him. I want to be, and he's always like, no, I want you to be a roadie. I don't want to be a roadie. I don't want to be carrying equipment. I don't want to be dragging the amps to the car. How rude.
I might need to have a little talk with Ray.
Yes. Thank you. I appreciate that.
You're supposed to learn that early on, that's kind of a big mistake.
Yeah. I'm like, dude, seriously? That notwithstanding, and oh, by the way, I do refuse to touch the equipment. I've put my foot down, but yeah. I want to let the audience know, Spencer and I, we always talk about sort of big issue stuff. I want you to know that I'm going to open up the phone lines, 773-763-9232. 9278. You can text me on that line. You can call and have Devin put you through, because of all the things that we've talked about. Today, we know we are going to be pushing buttons. You know, one of the things that I've mentioned on this show all the time is there are so many words that people throw around, and either they don't know what they mean, or the meaning has become so cloudy, so muddy, that you can sort of take the word and have it mean whatever you want it to mean in context. And one of those words is Zionism, and people who are consider themselves Zionist. We are going to talk about what that means and what it doesn't mean. And, you know, with everything going on right now in the Middle East, it seems like a very appropriate discussion to be having. So, Spencer, what is your definition of Zionism?
Well, the short version of Zionism is the belief that Jews need a homeland where they will be at home the way anybody would be, and in particular be safe. And that's usually seen as their ancestral homeland in the Middle East, which of course overlaps with the territory in which Palestinians live, and we see all of the resulting strife, certainly since the end of World War II and going back before that. And I think that while we're talking about Zionism, I really want to focus on anti-Zionism, the anti-Zionism that's become popular lately on the left, because I think that, you know, at the core of the strife in the Middle East is just enormous complexity and enormous suffering amongst all of the people involved. And the trouble is that the current view of what's going on all too often is yet another example of human beings being addicted to binary thinking. It's really too hard for our brains most of the time to even begin to engage with the complexity of actual life. So we always want to reduce things to simple binary choices between yes and no and good and bad. And I'm very worried about the discussion about Zionism and anti-Zionism right now, where across much of the left, it's emerged as conventional wisdom that to be Zionist is bad and to be anti-Zionist is good.
Well, it has taken
the whole
on,
solution to the Middle East problem is to end Zionism.
Zionism, I think, has taken on these overtones of some kind of really, really radical stance. And, you know, originally it didn't come from that kind of a place. You know, my understanding is that, you know, you want to create a state for the Jewish people and you support that, there you go. That's Zionism. It doesn't have anything to do with politics or who's elected or who's waging war against whom. That, my understanding, is just really, really basic. You believe that there is a movement that allows the creation of a Jewish state. But it's, to me, when I hear people using the word, you're right, whether they're on the left or not, people use it like a bad word.
Yeah, Zionist has become an insult,
yes.
an all-purpose insult. You might be called a fascist, or you might be called a Zionist, or you might be called both. And that's really, you're basically right. I mean, it's more complicated than that, but basically, yeah, it is the belief that there is and should be a nation for the Jewish people, like there are nations that have been established for Germans and Italians and Japanese. America is kind of an exception because America is what's called a civic nation, founded on an idea. But almost every other nation started out as what's known as an ethnic nation. And so Israel is an example of that. Now, because of the history, it's more complicated than that. But to use the word Zionist as an insult is very much similar to using the word German, Italian, Japanese, or Brazilian as an insult.
How did this happen? How did this transition? Is it just because people who didn't really understand it used it as an insult?
Well, you know what I think would be helpful? That's part of it. But I think it would be helpful if I could, and if I don't blow past 3 commercial breaks in the process, try to give a the shortest history I can of where Zionism came from and where the resistance to Zionism came from, at least in the Middle East, and then extending beyond there. Could I do that?
Well, you could, but you know what? We're at the beginning of the little section of time where I can take the break. So rather than interrupting you mid-thought, Devin, let's take a break now so we can chat in an uninterrupted fashion when we come right back after this.
This is Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
Right before we went to break, I rudely interrupted Spencer Critchley. Well, that was good music, Devin. Thank you for that. I felt like getting up and dancing. I interrupted Spencer Critchley. We are talking about Zionism and what it means to be a Zionist and the derivation of the term, what it has come to mean, what it means for some people. Spencer, you now have the floor.
Okay. So I mentioned beforehand that my concern about binary thinking. And I said that what's happening across much of the left is this assumption that Zionist is a bad half of a binary and anti-Zionist is the good half of a binary. And my argument here is not to argue for or against any of the sides of this long conflict, but to argue for complexity. The reason this ongoing crisis and all of this ongoing terrible suffering has not just been resolved in some simple fashion is that it is just terribly complex and entangled, and it's very, very hard to solve. You can come up with what looks like a solution, but getting people to actually enact that solution is often close to impossible, if not actually always impossible. And one of the ways that it gets simplified to this, yes, no, black and white binary is this view that's become so popular in our universities, I'm afraid, based on the version of post-colonial theory that's taught there now, that sees Israel as a colonial oppressor and Hamas as a liberation movement. And I can see why people see it that way. It has certain surface features that remind people of the Algerian war against their French occupiers, for example, and other anti-colonial wars. But that, I will argue, is just a gross oversimplification of what's going on. And it's as much of an oversimplification as to say something like the only reason Palestinians are angry is because they hate Jews. Anybody who is at all familiar with the history would find that to be a really objectionable oversimplification of the Palestinian.
There's a lot of oversimplification when it comes to these kinds of discussions. And I'm seeing, frankly, some of that in the texting comments that have come in from people who clearly understand or believe they've understand that here's one. This is like the tamest one. Zionism is predicated on creating a Jewish ethno-state. Zionism relies on political violence and terrorism. That's one person covering all those bases.
Yeah, that's really common. I get a fair bit about this kind of thing lately as I've been talking about this topic, and it's one of the reasons why I'm talking about it. And as an extension of that, I'm not Jewish, but it's also because many Jews are afraid to talk about this topic these days because of the onslaught of that kind of talk they get immediately. Mm-hmm. And if we believe in equal rights for everybody, if we believe in equal rights for traditionally persecuted minorities, then the most important time to stand up for that belief is when some particular minority happens to be unpopular for whatever reason. It's easy to stand up for minorities who are currently popular to stand up for. But right now, and I think this is a terrible situation, however you view the situation in the Middle East, including if you think Israel is by far overwhelmingly at fault for everything that's gone wrong. To have a situation where Jews are afraid to express their opinions is a terrible situation. It's just as terrible as if Muslims, Black people, women, anybody who's traditionally been silenced or oppressed is afraid to express their opinion. And we're in a situation like that across much of the left right now. So again, let me emphasize, I'm not arguing that one view of history is the correct one here. I'm arguing that there is no one correct view of history. It's enormously complicated. And if you refuse to consider all the different aspects of the history, you don't understand what's been happening, and you probably are not going to help work us towards some kind of solution. So with
even
that
if
said,
you look it up, the word up in Wikipedia, which I realize is not like the Oxford English Dictionary, the final sentence in the definition, Zionists wanted to create a Jewish state in Palestine with as much land, as many Jews, and as few Palestinian Arabs as possible. So there you go.
That seems a little loaded. So what I promised to do before the break is to do my best to give a short history of Zionism. Now, I'm sure this history won't make anybody happy, whether they're Zionist, anti-Zionist, or somewhere in between, or just confused. But I'm going to do my best, okay? Mm-hmm. And it will be based on credible historical sources. So to describe Israel as an ethnic state, as one of these texters did, is, yeah, that's mostly accurate, although it's also a liberal democracy, unlike some other ethnic states. But almost every state, as I was saying earlier, was founded as an ethnic state. Germany is the home of the Germans, France of the Franks or the Gauls, Italy of the Italians, et cetera, et cetera. And so Israel was founded during actually the 19th century wave of nation-state formation, which, by the way, is a fairly recent phenomenon. Nations were only really invented starting in the late 18th and into the 19th century in the way we understand them now. And that's when modern Germany was founded and modern Italy was founded and lots of the nations we know now. So during that time, there was also a rise of Arab nationalism and the earliest form of Jewish nationalism or Zionism, which at first was very unpopular among most European Jews. It was a fringe movement, and Jews in Europe and in Russia were finally feeling optimistic after, a couple of millennia of oppression at the hands of various empires and nations and just groups of people who hated Jews. They were feeling somewhat optimistic because there was this liberalization happening as part of the Enlightenment that came up during the 18th century. So monarchies were liberalizing, including the monarchy of Tsar Alexander II in Russia. He was actually starting to give rights to Jews and protecting them from harassment and violence. And similar things were happening in Europe. Vienna, for example, was becoming a welcoming city to Jews, and it was in Vienna where there was this tremendous outpouring of Jewish creativity and success. You had people like Sigmund Freud and all these great composers and philosophers and scientists, and all clustered in Vienna. And so there was a great deal of optimism that finally things were going to get better for the Jews. And so when some folks were talking about, well, maybe with all these other people forming nations, it's time for the Jews to have their own nation. And the early Zionist movement started to grow up around that time. But in a really deep and dark irony of democratic progress, it turned out that when you didn't just have an absolute ruler like Alexander II decreeing that Jews now would be entitled to some rights, but you started to have more democratic societies. As the common people started to have more democratic power, there was this resurgence of what we could call grassroots anti-Semitism that had been there for, around 2,000 years. And so after Alexander II was assassinated, the next guy was an arch-conservative and not at all friendly to the Jews. And then you started to have all these terrible pogroms against the Jews in Russia. Meanwhile, in France, there was the Dreyfus affair where a Jewish army officer was wrongly convicted of being a traitor. And this stretched on for a couple of decades, but was an enormous scandal in France and really an epochal event in the history of anti-Semitism. And then after World War I, there was further backsliding in terms of equal rights for Jews, and a continuing resurgence of this really virulent anti-Semitism that was getting worse and worse. And of course, in the 1930s, we saw the rise of the Nazis, And then in World War II, we had the Holocaust. So Zionism amongst Jews went from being this fringe movement that most Jews didn't take seriously, and there were many Jewish anti-Zionists. They thought, well, this is going to just screw everything up. We're finally starting to be accepted as of the late 19th century. Things are finally going our way, and you want to separate us from everybody? We should, no. We should merge with European or Russian society and enjoy the fruits of this. And, the educated Jews tended to be in favor of the Enlightenment, in favor of liberal democracy, so they liked the way that was going. But then the way history ended up working out with this resurgence of increasingly vicious anti-Semitism, Europe and Russia and Europe gradually shut down for the Jews so that they were increasingly seeing their rights taken away from them. They were targeted by violence. And then with the Nazis and their explicitly anti-Semitic and then increasingly genocidal message. And then in World War II, we saw them act on it, and we saw the Holocaust to the point that the population of Europe was almost entirely depleted of Jews. And so by that time, Zionism had gone from being this fringe movement dismissed by most Jews or actively opposed by them to embraced by almost all Jews, because now the remaining Jews were a population of desperate refugees who, by the way, had also been turned away largely by the United States and Canada and other countries that, I think we should be ashamed to be able to say that about.
Yeah,
so they were in this position of desperate refugees, although I should say, in all fairness, the United States have been quite welcoming to the Jews for a while. It's just that went away. Anyway, you had this population after the Holocaust of desperate refugees who had narrowly survived extinction, who now saw the ancient land of Israel, where, from their point of view, there had been a continuous presence of Jews for 3,000 years. They saw that as their last hope. So it was basically Zionism or nothing. And that's the version of Zionism that, as it looks to most Jews, for understandable reasons. So this post-colonial theory version of Zionism is that Zionists are basically the same as European colonizers like Britain or France or Belgium or Germany and the other European countries that colonized indigenous peoples around the world and exploited them and oppressed them and often enacted violence against them while stealing their land and overriding their culture and all of the terrible things that happened as a result of colonialism. Now, you can criticize a lot about the founding of Israel, but to call this population of desperate refugees, the few survivors of the slaughter of millions of people just like them, to the point that Europe had been basically depopulated of Jews, to call them European colonizers who are going in to become oppressors of indigenous people, when they themselves are also indigenous people from the same land. The roots are the same. The Arabs have been present in that same land for roughly 2,500 years, I believe. I don't think it matters who's been there a few hundred years longer, one way or the other. But you can see why I think that's just a radical oversimplification of the situation we're dealing with here. And there's much more to it than that. Once we get into the founding of Israel, not by a wave of European colonizers coming in and conquering this land, but by the United Nations after Britain had basically handed the problem over to the United Nations.
I do want to get into all of that. We need to take another break, though I do want to share with you, you got at least one wonderful text. I agree with Spencer. Equal rights for all needs to be the baseline we use in our judgments, decisions, and policies. It is a simple plan. Thanks, from Rick. We're going to take a break. Spencer and I will be back with more talk that's going to make you crazy right after this.
Joan Esposito, live.
Celebrating our power to bring about change.
Local.
Everybody has to work together.
And progressive.
I think you get the idea.
On WCPT 820.
Spencer Critchley is here, and we have decided to tackle the subject of Zionism, a word that is bandied about quite a bit. And my frustration is that it seems that each person who uses the word comes away with a different understanding of what it is they're talking about, what that word means. Spencer, we've gotten a couple of texts that talk about, getting rid of Netanyahu, and that's something that you and I have talked about before, that the government isn't the state.
I would love to see that.
Yeah, and vice versa.
I would love to see that happen.
But here's one text that came in. Zionism is the belief that Palestinians can and must be expelled from their homeland so that settlers can take their place. You're saying a lot of words when the last sentence in that Wikipedia post summed up the history of Zionism much better than you ever could. It is a racist ethno-state turned terroristic.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is typical of, the discussion of this topic. And any time someone insists that the answer is easy, it's this. It's because Palestinians are evil, or it's because Israel is a terrorist ethno-state, bunch of settler colonialists, etc. Anything that's formulated that way is likely, almost certainly, to be wrong if you're talking about history, especially a history as tortured as this one. The 20th century columnist known as the Sage of Baltimore, H.L. Mencken, about whom, there's problems we could point to as well, but he's often quoted because he's so quotable. He famously said, for every complicated solution, there's an answer that's simple and wrong. And that's true of this history. So, as an example of that, I was just talking about, the history of Zionism, the way it would be described as part of Jewish history. And I don't want to skate over the problems with the foundation of the creation of Israel. It's just that the creation of the state of Israel was much more complicated than this really radically simplistic settler colonialist view that unfortunately is being taught in so many of our universities, and which, in my opinion, is reductive to the point of frequently just being plain ahistorical. So I'll try to be really brief about this part as well. So, after World War II, colonialism was falling apart, and Britain, which had been the most powerful imperial empire in the world, was broke after World War II and couldn't afford to keep its colonies even if it wanted to. And it had inherited what we now call, modern Israel or Palestine after World War I, after the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, which had previously been occupying all of that area for a long time, often fairly tolerantly, by the way. But so Britain inherited it after World War I, and the mission there was to try to manage the transition to a Jewish homeland that would also would be shared by the Arabs who were already living there. And by the way, there were Jews already living there, as there had been for thousands of years. But clearly the majority was Arabs. So that was difficult from the start. And after World War II, Britain was broke and exhausted and basically handed the problem over to the United Nations. And that invited participation by Arab nations and Jewish leaders, and also, other United Nations members like the United States and European powers, et cetera, to try to work out a essentially two-state solution that would be fair to Arabs and to Jews, and find a way to share this land that both Arabs and Jews had been claiming for thousands of years, a conflict, a disagreement over whose homeland that was that goes back literally thousands of years. The Arab nations refused to participate in that process. Israel did, and at the end, there was a large majority vote in the United Nations to create the modern state of Israel as shared land, roughly split between Arabs and Jews, although Jews got some percentage points more in terms of square miles than Arabs did. That led to war. There was the Arab nations were. The Arab nations refused to recognize the state of Israel. Israel declared independence, and then we had war. with Arab nations attacking this new Israeli state because they saw it as a foreign presence in their midst. Now, ever since, there have been atrocities committed by both sides, and you can argue forever over who's been worse. I think that one fundamental argument for Israel is that it's at least founded as a liberal democracy, and it's been battling dictatorships for most of its existence. But that said, nothing justifies atrocities, in my view. So during what the Israelis call the War of Independence and what Palestinians call the Nakba, or catastrophe, which started in 1948, there were atrocities such as Deir Yassin in April of 1948, when these paramilitary groups, Israeli paramilitary groups, killed roughly 100 Palestinian villagers, including women and children. Israelis did expel tens of thousands of Palestinians during the course of this war. There are other atrocities, and and anybody can Google this stuff. If you Google something like, atrocities committed by Israelis during their War of Independence, you'll come up with stuff like this. But if you're also willing to Google things like atrocities committed by the Palestinian resistance over the years, you can come up with truly horrifying stories about that as well. And again, to say that the whole problem here is that that Israelis were essentially in the tradition of European colonization of indigenous peoples requires you to ignore all the other history. Just like if you were to argue that Israel is 100% righteous in all of this and anything to the contrary is just anti-Semitic propaganda, that requires you to ignore a whole bunch of history. Nobody emerges from this history with clean hands, and obviously the way Israel was created did not work out all that well. If you look at what's happened since, whoever you want to say is at fault, and I would argue that many, many people are at fault, and ultimately human nature is at fault. But this current binary that if we just got rid of Zionism, which means if we got rid of the state of Israel, then we wouldn't have this problem, is, well, it's typical of this post-colonial theory that's being taught, which is part of this overall brand of theory I've talked to you about before that I have big problems with for similar reasons, that it's just so radically reductive and ultimately shares the same kind of radical reductivism that is why Marxism doesn't work, or any form of, extreme ideological dogmatism.
We have been getting texts from people. Have Spencer talk about this. Have Spencer talk about this. Ask Spencer about this. So let's start with one of our regulars, Carl from Kankakee. Wants you to discuss a history of addressing compensation for those displaced by the Zionist settlers.
Yeah, well, I mean, how much time do we have? This is also typical of this.
Spencer will be back every day this week at 4:00 as we continue on this journey.
Joan, I hate to say it, but with this rigidity and reductivism that's becoming so common on the left, as you know, I spend a lot of time talking to people on the right, and it's like the mirror image. So this is an example of somebody say, oh, yeah, well, what about this particular example, which will then lead us, down a rabbit hole. And then the next person has their own rabbit hole. And pretty soon you've got this infinitely branching conversation. And at no point have we addressed any of the points we started out with. And so, as I've said repeatedly here, my point here is not to argue that Israel's never done anything wrong, far from it. And similarly, my point is not to argue that Palestinians or God knows the people leading Palestinians have never done anything wrong, because I think a big part of this problem is that the Palestinian people have been led by a series of crooks and terrorists and dictators who did not have their interests at heart. And now the Israelis are suffering under the leadership of Netanyahu, who I think is doing an enormous amount of damage to the state of Israel.
Spencer, why don't we take a break here? And because we're on our final segment, let's talk about Netanyahu and the current government of Israel. Spencer Critchley and I will be right back after this. Hey, are you interested in buying a home? Call Team Hochberg, our trusted local lender. They have nearly 800 five-star Google reviews. Tom and Jenny have 2 kids. They'd outgrown their small apartment. They had 640 credit scores, a combined income of $130,000, limited savings. They called Team Hochberg for a free consultation. David answered their questions, introduced them to a realtor who then found them the perfect home, and he helped them secure an FHA mortgage with just 3.5% down. Before calling Team Hochberg, Tom and Jenny felt stuck in an apartment that no longer fit their growing family. After talking with David, they got an FHA mortgage and bought their first home with only 3.5% down. If you're looking for a home, you have credit scores in the 600s, limited funds for a down payment, do what many of our listeners have done, like Tom and Jenny. Call Team Hochberg, 855-563-2843, or go online, 56david.com. That number again, 855-563-2843, or go on the website you know and love, 56david.com. ACM Equal Housing Lender, NMLS 643114.
Now back to Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive.
I wouldn't trust anybody else.
On WCPT 820.
Spencer Critchley and I, but mostly Spencer, have been talking for the last hour about Zionism and how the right of Israel to exist does not mean a rubber stamp for the government of Israel. Those are 2 separate things. And I've been getting a number of texts about Benjamin Netanyahu. You and I have talked about this before, Spencer, that one thing is not the other thing.
Right. And, you know, Netanyahu and Hamas in many ways kind of need each other. And they perpetuate this problem by serving their own self-interest. And meanwhile, it's the people who suffer on both sides. And, you know, I want to say something about Hamas as well. Megan Romer, one of the co-chairs, I think, of the DSA, and expressing opinions that are common with the DSA these days in its present form. It's changed a lot in the last few years. Was defending the October 8th, pro-Hamas rally that happened after October 7th, after the terrible massacre of Israeli civilians on October 7th. She was defending that and saying it was inevitable because of this settler colonialist view of the situation there. And this is typical of seeing Hamas as a liberation movement. First of all, it's not necessary for liberation movements to target civilians deliberately, and the successful ones don't do that. The ones that do that end up just either failing or creating a new form of dictatorship. Hamas is not a liberation movement. They are a brutal dictatorship oppressing the people in Gaza. They are deliberately sacrificing Palestinian civilians as part of their strategy, because they want to see essentially the thousands upon thousands, tens of thousands of deaths of Palestinian civilians. This does not excuse the IDF for those civilian deaths, but that plays right into Hamas's strategy. Hamas will not let Palestinian civilians into those tunnels where Hamas fighters are safe from bombs raining down. They've never used those as bomb shelters. And if Hamas were to somehow defeat Israel and establish stable rule over the same territory where Israel is now, however much those folks living there, however much they might object to Israel, they would be living under something far, far worse. That's, again, not a justification of the occupation, but they would be living under a corrupt, brutally cruel, theocratic dictatorship that has no interest in Western concepts like rights or even the concept of a nation. Their mission ultimately is to redeem Islam and take it back essentially to the way it was in the 7th century when it was founded by the Prophet Muhammad. So that's another part of this that's just, it kind of boggles my mind, but this stuff is actually being taught and has been taught to generations of college students as just, well, this is the current state of historical scholarship.
You know, it's really frustrating because we want this to be simple and we want this to be easy. We got this text that I thought you'd appreciate. Please tell Spencer that April in Oak Park deeply appreciates his explaining the complexity of the conflict between Palestinians and Israelis. I'm so disappointed that our beloved left has become so rigid about this issue. And that's not just the left. There are a lot of people who have become very rigid about this issue across the political spectrum, too.
I wholeheartedly agree, though, because supposedly at least the liberal left, which is everybody from the center to the far progressive left of liberalism, one of our core principles, there's nothing more fundamental than the principle of freedom of thought and freedom of speech. You know, there are other equally important principles, but they're none more important than that. And to have a situation where on the left, large numbers of people are afraid to express their opinions, this does not mean anybody has to agree with any of those opinions. But the idea that expressing an opinion, unless, of course, it's some kind of hateful violence inciting opinion, then of course we should criticize that. But the whole point is that we're supposed to be the people in favor of freedom and equality for everybody. But it turns out if you're an unpopular minority, you don't get it. And how could that possibly be something we want to have said about people on the left? I also wholeheartedly agree with the point that what needs to be defended here is complexity. As I have said multiple times, I'm not arguing for one side or the other here. I am arguing for recognizing the terrible complexity of this issue and the complexity that's typical of pretty much every important issue.
I'm going to read you one complimentary text about that and then throw you another text that wants to have a point of view on this. Joan, good job trying to tackle this so polarizing subject. Thanks to you and Spencer both to try and bring reason back to this important problem. It's a problem that may damage our chances in the upcoming election. And then there's this. Liberals love to blame Netanyahu when most Israelis don't feel he's gone far enough in exterminating Palestinians. It's liberals' way of denouncing a genocide while still funding it. That one goes on, but I think we've captured it.
Two things here. That's a classic straw man argument where you start out by saying it's something that sounds like it's terrible. And of course, we must be against that. The trouble is, it's just not true. So, you know, it's essentially the same as, have you finally stopped beating your wife? It's a straw man argument to say that's the whole point. And I forget what the second half of that one was. Liberals.
Blaming Netanyahu is a liberal's way of denouncing a genocide while still funding it.
So this is something that liberals writ large don't fully appreciate, that liberalism has become a dirty word across much of the left as well. And this, again, also largely proceeds from the academic left, which I think has a lot to answer for, partly because I disagree with their opinions, but that's not by far the most important thing. I would say partly because their scholarship is so shockingly shoddy, as you'll learn if you actually learn about it. And I'm far from alone among people on the left who have that opinion. And so it's become conventional wisdom that liberals, are essentially the same as just collaborators with oppression. And liberalism is at best a sham, if not part of this whole structure of oppression that's keeping the people down. This is another opinion that dates back to Karl Marx. And unfortunately, most liberals in America anyway are not particularly ideological, and they don't realize that liberalism is under assault. And I argue, if you think you're a liberal, you need to understand what that means and why you're a liberal. You need to understand some basics about what you stand for. Because if you think you can be in an alliance with people who are anti-liberal, that's not going to work. You can't be liberal and anti-liberal at the same time. You can be centrist liberal and very progressively liberal at the same time. But you can't be both for and against liberalism at the same time. And in my view, again, it's not the only view in the world, and I welcome people disagreeing with it. because I'm a liberal. But in my view, liberalism is the only successful response to tyranny that history has yet produced. And if we want to just throw away this precious inheritance, it's not perfect. It's certainly got lots of flaws. But if we want to throw it away, what we're choosing is tyranny. And whether it's tyranny on the right, as we see on the MAGA right, or I would argue tyranny on the left, which is what we see in the worst of the most intolerant and dogmatic parts of the anti-liberal left.
You know what? We are very close to the end of our segment, so I'm not even going to read you any more texts.
I can probably imagine what they say.
Well, you know, they're really, honestly, there have been a ton of them. I mean, a ton of them, and they're kind of all over the map. There isn't, it's very interesting to me when I'm talking about something and most of the texters have a particular point to make and they make it over and over and over again. But on this particular subject, man, we have had responses that go from A to Z, and very few of them have repeated the ideas presented in other people's texts, which is very unusual for this show, which just goes to show how my original thesis was that this isn't something we can even all agree on a definition about, let alone
there are definitions. It's just that people keep stating new ones, like Zionism is inherently, terrorist and settler colonialist, etc. One of the most important things I hope we can someday soon recover is the ability to hear a point made by another person and then address that point, instead of just reasserting our own opinion as if the other person didn't say anything. And in addressing the point, if you don't understand why they believe that, maybe ask them why they believe that. If you think you have a completely different understanding, maybe frame that as, gosh, my understanding of that was this. Why don't you see it that way? Imagine the potential, folks.
Yeah, really.
Imagine the possibilities. I say, dare to learn something. I know we're running out of time, but another way I often talk about this is, look, if I want to make sure I never, ever lose an argument, I know how to do that. And that's by being willing to lose an argument. Because if I lose, let's say that I learn after this show, somebody writes me a thoughtful note and they point out how I got everything wrong and they cite some credible sources I can look up and check for myself. And I learn a lot in that case, I say, oh my God, I think I had this all wrong. Well, okay, so I lost a big argument, but I didn't really lose because now I know a lot more, right? I'm less ignorant.
Exactly.
Right? That's a win for me. It's as if by losing the argument, if I lose an argument with you and you hand me $1,000, I don't feel too bad about that, right? But imagine all the hours I might have spent, or even years of my life I might have spent being wrong about some topic, and somebody who defeats me in an argument points out where I was wrong. I win. So in that way, you never
win
ever
either
lose
way.
an argument.
By the way, one of our last texters wants us to now take on the words liberal and progressive. Sweetheart, that'll be another day, another time.
That's a great idea.
Because we're out of time. And Spencer, thank you so much. Most of the people who've texted in that appreciate this discussion realize, that we are really putting ourselves on the line with a very controversial kind of topic. And I thank you for being willing to go there.
Oh, I thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. And as usual, the great questions and great conversation.
Spencer Critchley and I are finished for the day. Patty Vasquez is up next. Ken Mejia Beal is going to be her co-host. Dr. Kristen Lyerly is going to be with her, and Dylan Blaha, who's a former Democratic congressional candidate in Illinois. I will see you tomorrow at 2 o'clock. Until then, have a great evening and good night.
This is Richard Chu with something to chew on. Dr. Abdul El Sayed just won the Democratic primary for U.S. Senate in Michigan. The voters prevailed over $60+ million of outside money. So where do we go from here? If we, as progressive liberal Democrats, really want to save our democracy and take back Congress, then we all need to lean into this election in Michigan. So let's do some donor math. If 50% of the people who voted for Kamala Harris in the 2024 election each donate $5 to Dr. Syed's campaign, that would provide his team with roughly $200 million to wage a grassroots fight against Republican Mike Rogers. When you combine that with the fact that Dr. Syed's ideas are better for all citizens in Michigan, it's a real winning combination. So let's get to it, progressives, and win this country-altering U.S. Senate seat.
Richard Chew, weekday mornings at 6 on WCPT 820.
Everyone needs to take care of their mental health, even running back Bijan Robinson.
When I'm on the field and feeling the pressure, I usually just take a deep breath. When I'm just breathing and seeing what's in front of me, everything just slows down. It just makes me feel great before I run the play.
Just like Bijan, we all need a strong mental game on and off the field. Make a game plan for your mental health at